nobody planned to continue developing this thing until you came to the picture.
Wait a minute. This is not just interesting. I've never seen that before.
In many applications, actually, what SimDec showed was not necessarily intuitive.
It will be so useful for, again, not only researchers, but practitioners. Once that is recognized, it will just take off.
A dream to make SimDec global industry and scientific standard for sensitivity analysis. Okay, Julian, thank you for coming here. I've been asked more and more a question where SimDec comes from, and Thibaut will help us answer this question.
Excellent.
So the idea is to tell the story behind the SimDec today together.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep. And shall we perhaps start from introducing ourselves?
Okay.
I'm lucky to have you on board. Actually, you're such a big guy with your professor. You are director of a couple of master degrees, artificial intelligence and business administration. And it's all happening in School of Business in Toronto. That is, correct me if I'm wrong, quite high in ratings in the world, right?
It can be, yes, depending upon which ranking system we're emphasizing. But yes, it is ranked.
Okay. What research areas are of the most interest to you, and why did you decide to work with me?
Well, I have worked on things of interest to myself over the last 30 years in university. I started in the areas of production scheduling, but didn't find that particularly interesting because it's all theory of computation stuff. And I moved into an area of which is called simulation optimization, or it became known as simulation optimization, which is really a very difficult area of stochastic optimization in that you don't really have formalized mathematical models that you're solving, but you're trying to optimize data, which is simulated data. And the way that is done is to use generally very methods which are part of the meta-heuristic process. So, the simulated annealings, the taboo searches. And
I remember you were working with B algorithm, right?
I was actually working into the Firefly algorithm.
Okay.
Yeah. And this, it's basically machine learning, or it became known as machine learning. And so now this is really part of the AI machine learning field. It wasn't known as that when I started. And where I was applying this, because it is useful in real world problems, is that I started working on waste management. And I was able to solve some major city problems and saved multi-millions of dollars using this approach, and was able to construct software that would do this. And so it was kind of a natural way of combining academic work with real world work. And from that, I kind of extended into another area of decision support using these approaches in order to generate alternatives to problems. So in optimization, you're trying to find the best solution, but best solutions don't really work in real world applications because of items which are not included in the modeling, like political pressures and biases and so on, so that if somebody rejects an optimal solution, then what do you do? And so this is an area referred to as modeling to generate alternatives, where you can use these algorithms to create very, very different solutions to a problem. They're not the mathematically optimal ones, but they're close to optimal in the mathematical measures. And in doing this, this is where I was using the Firefly algorithm, because that allows you to search multiple portions of a feasible region for answers. And so it was a kind of a neat way of working in the real world while also working in academic research. So that was really my background in terms of optimization, mathematical modeling, and simulation.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting research areas, and I believe that you must have a couple of very happy and influential friends somewhere in administration.
Well, in that waste management one, particularly the civic employees, when they were facing this era of no new taxes, the only way to really reduce your budget was to reduce your expenses. And in waste management, pretty well everything is an expense. Because it's not really a revenue generator. And so if you can shave off 5% or 10% of a municipal budget, that's a significant amount of money, and taxpayers will thank you for that.
True. Yep. And
I should also admit that it's not the sexiest area to work in,
right.
working in garbage and so on. But people.
But I believe there are much worse options than this one. So
yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yes, and perhaps then it's a good time to switch to SimDec. And yeah, meanwhile you were working on waste problems. I was working on energy investments, and specifically focusing on different types of energy policy and support instruments for renewable energy investments. And one of the cases I was focusing on was really, really difficult and complicated. Let me show you how the model looks. Yes, this is the model that I have constructed to analyze it. And well, the target of this picture is not to make anybody understand anything, but only to illustrate that it's complex. There's huge amount of different input factors on the left side, and they all are somehow intertwined in the calculation that is hidden in these big blocks. And then some kind of output is coming out, and here it's profitability of investment. And I wanted to see how this policy affects the investments. So and the policy is quite tricky. It had some multiple what-if rules. So I've decided to study the whole possibilities, the entire range of possible outcomes. And so I ran this model multiple times, Monte Carlo simulation, substituting the values of the inputs. And this is what I got at the result. So it's a probability distribution of net present values, or the profitability of that project. And this is not the distribution that people who work in probability theory are accustomed to see, I would say. There's clearly, it's not normal. It's very weirdly shaped. It has some peaks, and it's clearly something going on inside that makes the distribution look this way. But it wasn't that straightforward to understand what actually was it. So I started to play with inputs to see different combinations of them and how they affect the outcome. And I started to run different scenarios of this model. And there were many of them, and I lost track, and it wasn't very systematic in terms of how should I change the inputs, how much, which inputs, which groups. There was so many degrees of freedom, and it's actually crazy unsystematic, and I didn't like it. I started to build intuition of what's going on inside, but it was like very random. So, and once when I was walking with the dog, let me get the dog back. Wait a second, dog. Tiba. Yep. So, and this model was in my mind for like several weeks or even months, and I was burying it all the time in my brains. And once working with Thibaut, I've got an idea. I've got an idea that instead of building different scenarios of this model, I could instead run it all together and take the whole entire output of it and decompose it systematically into different scenarios. And those scenarios would be formed of different combinations of ranges of input factors. So when I did it, I actually was amazed with the result because, well, every single peak in the distribution became very clear. Why is it there? So we can, for example, see that the very first peak to the right corresponds to the scenario with all the critical input factors in the green area, and that's actually signifies the good performance of the project. And what's peculiar about this scenario is that the project pays off regardless of the market conditions that can be very volatile. So the support mechanism would ensure the profitability of investment, even if the market goes some wrong direction. That was the beautiful conclusion in my PhD. And then, of course, you can also analyze all the other scenarios and see how different factors intertwine. Like, for example, scenario number 2 is partly in the positive zone as well, but scenario number 3 or scenario number 5 are no longer there. So, yeah, many interesting things are coming from there. But in my opinion, this was just a trick. It wasn't a method actually in my head. It was just a trick I applied for a model in some particular case, and then it appeared to be very handy in that case. And it was about to beat. Nobody planned to continue developing this thing until you came to the picture. You were invited to be my opponent on the doctoral defense. Tell me, please, why this method actually attracted your attention and why you were the one telling me, Mariia, stop doing your energy research, focus on SimDec. This is really something.
Well, let me kind of back up just a little bit more from that. Yes, I was your external examiner or opponent. And I have my background in the simulation optimization areas, and I've been a good friend of your PhD supervisor for 10, maybe 15 years.
Mikhail Kola.
And Mikhail Kola. And he had brought me in because I had dabbled in the environmental side of the applications of these things. And so that really coincided with your focus on energy and so on. Now, being an opponent, the role is very different to the examinations that we have in North America. The examinations that we have, it's basically the PhD committee plus 1 or 2 other people and the candidate all get together in one room, and that's the examination, and nobody dresses up. Whereas in Finland, it's a lot more orchestrated, a formal process that lasts throughout the day. Everybody dresses up. The actual defense itself is an open session with lots of people in attendance, friends, family, fellow students, faculty, and so on. And the opponent or the external examiner also comes in and does a presentation there, which is not the case at least in Canada and North America. So it's a very different process.
It is. I believe the idea behind making opponent present something is to have at least something interesting to listen to during this public examination.
Yeah. So Mikhail had described to me what the process should be like, or what a good examination is, and from the description, it needs to be somewhat theatrical. That it's there, and the best defenses are very much, the way I would liken it to is to these British courtrooms that you see on these drama series on TV, where you know, in the British courts they've got the wigs on and the robes and so on, and the lawyers or the barristers are very articulate and theatrical when they're presenting these things. And Mikhail was saying that yes, come in and act like that. And the best defenses are the ones where the opponent comes in with an act of superiority, and they present in a very gruff way, and then they start to ask various questions of the candidate, to make it look like they're intimidating, and they try to sort of push them to the edge of the ropes. And then, because it's the candidate's specialty, the candidate will push back, and the victory is to show that they know everything. And so those are the sorts of defenses that supposedly look the best and are the most interesting. And therefore, what you'd like to see is a sort of an interchange of the pushing of the candidate, almost like an academic argument.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the theater involved that I was told to expect. Now, in terms of your work, I was reading through it, and it's on the renewable energy is the problem, and that was your focus. And as I'm reading through, I came across SimDec, and you know, I read that, and as I read it, I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I read further on in the thesis as to how you had applied it. And as I'm reading that, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, this is not just interesting. I've never seen that before, and it's really useful because it's like an exploratory data analysis approach, in that the user can specify certain things to examine and see how it works. So input certain conditions and see how that works, as in see what sort of influence that has on the problem. And if they're not detecting something there, they could go back and adjust it and re-see it. And in terms of the presentation, it's a visual analytics approach, which is very novel. And you can display it in using these color schemes to reveal lots of information which are not revealed in other methods. And combining that with the user's ability to change things, it makes it a very applied approach. And again, it's something I had not seen before. Now, the reason I kind of pushed that, I think, at your defense was because I thought, because I hadn't seen this is something that is so new and so novel, but has the potential to be applied to so many different things, that this should actually be a focus of what you should do. Now, in terms of emphasizing that, we actually then got into a good academic argument, where I don't think you decided that, having focused the last couple of years of your life on renewable energy, that you should then immediately drop that and work on an analytical tool instead. And so we actually had a good academic debate on that, in your defense, which made it look like a realistic argument. And in effect, it kind of was.
Yes.
And so I think that made the theater of our interactions there very, very real and very useful in terms of how an audience would view it. And I think very diplomatically, you said that the way you kind of get out of that is to say we should work on that afterwards, which is actually what we have done. And we've kind of prodded out some of the features of it, and I think that it's readily apparent that it is such a novel approach that it can be used to analyze things in any field, and therefore I think it will have a huge impact on analysis once the kind of the tool and the method is developed a little bit further. It can be used absolutely anywhere, and it's really not just simulation that you can use it with. It's actual data sets as well that you can analyze data. It's kind of like a way of, if you can think of ANOVAs and MANOVAs, it's a way to analyze any set of data. And you can do this visually and interactively, and it's understandable to non-technical users. And so not only is it interesting from an academic sense, but from an applied sense, anyone that is analyzing data, which is in effect everybody, can use this. And so it's a huge breakthrough, I think, in terms of data analysis.
Yeah, well, we'll see about data analysis for that one. Still huge amount of things to be done. But yeah, you know what? I actually did hesitate to jump into SimDec exploration. First couple of years after the defense, I still was working a lot on the energy side. But then slowly we started to publish one paper after another just to try to apply SimDec to other cases. So what we had there carbon capture and storage investment, right? We had their life cycle analysis of CO2 emissions of a product, and some more investments, some geological case even. So there's been more and more cases accumulating, and it started indeed to be clear that it's industry agnostic. It can be applied anywhere. Practically what we need is some kind of model, and with some inputs, with some meaningful output, and that's it. It could be kilometers, it could be kilowatts, it could be, of course, euros or dollars. It can be pretty much anything at all. Could be people or dogs.
And applying it to any of the fields. And so where we need to do that then is to some field that requires all kinds of financial resources, so investment sides or healthcare, something like that. And so as soon as somebody, I think, recognizes how useful it can be, particularly in these fields of high financial, social, and environmental impact, I think once that is recognized, it will just take off. That I think that, as you say, the industry agnostic aspect to it is such an incredible highlight. And once people realize that you can use it anywhere, this will be a tool which is something that will become ubiquitous. Everyone will use it.
Yeah, that was my secret, not secret anymore, dream to make SimDec global industry and scientific standard for sensitivity analysis of any computational model. Yeah. Last couple of years, we started to look into sensitivity analysis a bit more. So initially, we thought of SimDec as a method on top of upgrade of Monte Carlo simulation, right? And we were trying to generalize it in that field. But apparently there is a separate scientific domain in sensitivity analysis. It's practically science of understanding black box models and how different inputs affect the output, right? And there is many different developments in that field, quite for a long time. It's well established. And the only thing is that the biggest question which is asked there at all, and so answered then, is what factors are the most influential. So practically the whole field is about measuring the importance of the factors and how they explain the variance of the output. And there is many different peculiar things in there. But I think that with SimDec, we go much beyond that. We kind of, apart from measuring which factors are the most important, we are also able to visualize their influence. We are able to visualize their interactions. And those things might be very, those things might be not straightforward at all. For example, let's assume we found a most influential variable. And then why is it influential? Is it just linear and there is a slope, quite high slope? Or is it going like a wave? Or is it going stepwise? Or is it going up and down with some triangular influence? Or maybe it doesn't have any effect for entire spectrum of it, but then at the end it suddenly strikes. So there could be a huge amount of different variabilities in how different input factors affect the outcome. And just a measure is not enough. But visualizing the type of that influence is very important. And then if we're talking about single variable, it's of course very easy to do with traditional methods. But if we're talking about interaction of two variables and their interactive effect on the output, then it's already, what response surfaces try to tackle it. But I think we are doing it in much better way, and then we can do 3 and more variables as well. Yep.
Yes, I think that the ability to visualize what the effects of interactions are is an outstanding feature from SimDec. And then these interactions, as you mentioned, are not just the 2 variable interactions, but the multiple variable interactions. And the ability to visualize these things, particularly when you can also make adjustments to the scenarios or the ranges of the variable values that you're looking at to see the impacts that those have, I think that makes this such a unique tool that it will be so useful for, again, not only researchers, but practitioners to be able to explore, to provoke or tease out what these relationships are. And it's not just the highly technical analysts that can use this, and trying to analyze the impacts of variables and the impacts of interactions mathematically can very, very quickly become so complex that you can't just just looking at numbers or looking at significances and so on, these numbers that are there. It's not an easy process, whereas you can visualize these impacts readily using SimDec. And you, as you've mentioned, the explorations of these things, one can also do calculations based upon generate the actual numbers that you're using in SimDec. But it's the ability to visualize it, I think, which makes it so readily accessible. And that's what I think is one of its key areas of usefulness, is that combination of being able to generate numbers which show the impacts of these things, but more easily being able to visualize it. And the visualization is so unique that I think it makes it such a great tool to have.
No, that's amazing to hear. Yep, and you know what, we are talking about interactions and influences, and for practitioners, I think it might be not that clear why would they need to see all those influences and interactions. But I found a way to describe it. It's practically what SimDec does. It provides actionable information. So you would be able to see scenarios which factors contribute how to the output, and where you need to lock your most important key factors so you'd be able to achieve a certain range of the output. If you're not able to do that, then okay, what scenarios lead you to the second best result? And then there would be usually combinations of different factors, like it might be investment a bit lower, but I don't know, production volume on the medium level, or the other way around, or maybe there is another factor than something else. And so there's a multiple layered insight that can be provided by SimDec. It's kind of a roadmap of where you can become if multiple ifs happen, or if you make multiple ifs happen. So,
and those multiple ifs can be of, as we've mentioned, more than just the two variables, where you can combine 3, 4, 5, 6 influential variables together, and there are not really other methods that permit you to explore that way, that you can put these things together and see, even at a 3 variable level, that's not an easy task to look at all the possible interactions that you can have if you're calculating that mathematically. But to be able to visualize that and to kind of see, if we've got these different variables at different levels, what's the result of that? And I think that is such a good aspect to this, that SimDec provides in terms of the exploration that users will find beneficial.
It's often, in many applications, actually, what SimDec showed was not necessarily intuitive. Intuition in more than 2 variables models, which are not linear, it already gets lost. I mean, I showed in one video that intuition for a model that y is equal a plus b multiplied by c is failing you sometimes. So can you imagine what's happening in the real world models with all the complexities?
Well, yes, that goes to the Kahneman and Tversky sort of views on rationalities, and how decision makers, when they're looking at things, tend to be, even skilled decision makers tend to be very myopic, in that they get some sort of preconceived idea as to what should be happening. And that influences how they approach a problem. And what we have seen, in perhaps that carbon capture case that we looked at, is that there was a very, very non-intuitive result that was in there. And without using SimDec, one wouldn't recognize that. It looked like the data was wrong, or the model was wrong, or why were we seeing that? Or SimDec was wrong. Yes, exactly. But it provided a way to focus on something which seemed very, very odd and counterintuitive. And then once you were aware that there was this action or interaction taking place, that you could then dig into it to see, well, what is actually going on? And if you were just a regular or skilled decision maker examining that, you would probably pass over that sort of analysis, because you'd view it as, well, there must be something incorrect with the data or the way that this is being looked at, and it couldn't possibly be what it was actually happening. Whereas this provides a way to simultaneously view the entire picture, and tease out results which might not be readily apparent.
And you know what, working more and more with modelers, it becomes clear that Well, as long as they have spent quite a while of their lives working with some type of particular models and playing with them and tweaking the inputs and checking how output would behave, they of course develop their professional intuition, and whatever model produces is not a surprise to them anymore. But then it often takes quite a while to communicate the patterns of the model behavior and how different factors contribute to it, right? And for this communication, I've seen people doing like 16 of different graphs on one page to convey some kind of insight from there, or writing papers or reports, and again doing multiple analytics. And one does require quite a lot of time to get into it and to form an opinion based on that. But with SimDec, it technically can be done from a single graph. So you can see the most important stuff in a single graph. And so you can also, as an analyst or a modeler, you can convey your message just that simply.
That's true. That rather than pulling out the different aspects, different scenarios, sort of overlaying one over the other, in this, it's looking at it simultaneously. And you can compare these different scenarios and immediately capture their relative sort of sizes and contributions and distributions simultaneously. And so it's not like where you'll create these multiple different charts of different things and then have to try to figure out, well, what if I combine this one with this one and this one and this one? It's already there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a fundamental aspect of SimDec, the display of these influences simultaneously.
Yeah.
Particularly the distributions of these things and the relative distributions, and being able to see it simultaneously, it eliminates the myopic bias of experts when they're viewing these things, and that they think, well, yes, there's this and there's this and there's this, but to be able to actually see them all together at the same time makes it readily accessible, and the comparisons are very, very nice when you can overlay them simultaneously.
Yeah, it practically makes sure that you wouldn't miss anything important. That's why I thought finally okay with my research when I first developed it. Yes, for a PhD. So, yeah. You know what? I've talked to some practitioners how they get to understand their models, so they are sure what's going on inside. And often the reply is that I'm just checking huge amount of different scenarios. Well, as I was checking when researching that weird renewable energy policy. And so you fix some factors, you change others, you see how the output behaves, then you do it other way around, then you start to change a couple of factors simultaneously at the same time to see what's going on. So it requires you, well, depending on the model and the number of inputs that you can affect, it requires you, well, a day, a week, it depends. Yeah, but with SimDec, it happens just like that, and it's there. It's cool. And we have seen so many weird things already, right? We have seen, and things that are also interactive. So practically things that wouldn't be able to show with any other types of analysis. So we have seen that one factor changes the direction of influence in another factor. We have seen that one factor at different levels affect the variance of the outcome in different ways. Like in one, let's say, state, it's a very narrow distribution, and in another, it's quite wide. Then we have seen that we are able to capture the marginal decrease of the influence in the different levels of other factors. Then we have seen, what else? We have also seen, for example, that one factor has huge amount of influence on the outcome in the certain state of another factor, but in others, it doesn't. It's simply not influential anymore. And all this kind of insight is so important for any kind of model, whether it's engineering, financial, or environmental, because it gives you an instrument, a lever to act, to decide, and stand on firm ground when doing that decision.
And the nice part of the interactive aspect to it is that, you can change things and explore things to see, what if I change this, what is the influence there? And the influence that you're seeing is not just a single value. So you don't change some aspects, what if I look at this from different ranges and so on? It's not just a single value of output. It's actually the entire distribution. And so if you make a change, you can immediately see what the change is to the distribution of outcomes for that under the different scenarios. And again, that's another attractive feature in that the measurements are, it's visual. I mean, and again, you can get numerical values, but not single numerical values. You get a distribution of those, and you can see the probabilities, in effect, of the various different output values or output influences that occur for the changes that you're looking at. So the sensitivity analysis aspects of this method are very, very useful in being able to demonstrate not just that single value, but the entire range of values and their relative likelihoods.
Yeah, relative likelihoods is also a very interesting thing, and it could be it could happen to be very different in different scenarios. So yeah, there is a lot that SimDec tells. Yes. We're actually now working on a feature that would translate SimDec graph into linguistic recommendations. So it would be easier for anybody to make conclusions based on SimDec.
Okay, so we're getting into natural language processing and so on here.
Yep. Okay, Julian, I think it was a super fruitful discussion. Many interesting details have been covered, the story of SimDec, why is it useful, and what kind of magical things we have uncovered on this way. Yeah, I think we sufficiently covered everything, and I'm really grateful for you to making this time in your busy life with all the responsibilities for talking to me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Mariia. There are always new and interesting ideas whenever we're discussing these things, and I think
at your service.
We've used that expression of when you're in the lab where you've got the mercury and you're trying to pick it up, that you try to grab it and it splits off into two different things, and then you try to get another one and it breaks off into something else. And so as with the mercury, this idea, as soon as you start poking and prodding it, seems to produce yet more ideas and more avenues to explore.
Yes.
So there's a lot more to come.
A lot more to come, and we'll have enough work for many other PhD students in the future, for sure. Yes.
Yes. Great to talk about this.
Yep, and thank you to my doc also to be patient for this interview. Yeah.
And thanks to Thibaut, yes, for being the originator of this whole research stream.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, Doc.